Well, as I think you've mentioned earlier, one of the potential fallacies of our food system is we think that we need to feed the world and that our problem is there isn't enough food in the world. What we have seen, what we have witnessed in countries around the world is that the problem is rarely that there isn't enough food. It's the kinds of food that are available and what people are interested in. People want to be able to nourish themselves and their families. It's not about the number of calories, it's about the content and nutrition. It's about access to land and water, the ability to grow and raise their own foods, to have markets that support local livelihoods, and to be able to eat the kinds of foods that people want for themselves now and into the future.
That was good. Can you tell me?
One of the major concepts that is important as groups like La Via Campesina, a global group of peasants from almost every country in the world will advocate for. It's not an issue of food security. In other words, it's not that people need enough, it's an issue of food sovereignty. People need access and they need the rights that go along with this so that they continue to be able to produce their own food and to be able to consume in the way that they would like to choose. And I think that's equally applicable actually in the US as much as it is in parts of the world. We see in cities like Detroit and San Francisco, in New Orleans, just as we see in rural areas in the US and around the world, that people are fundamentally concerned with having the right to good food, nutritious food, healthy food, and more than food, the kinds of ceremony and celebration that goes along with it and the way of life that it corresponds to.
You are different.
Yeah, well, I'm not convinced that there is a huge difference between American ideals and global ideals. I think that communities and people living in community around the world start to focus on the same sets of values. If you're living in a rural area, you know that your food is intimately related with the land, with the seasons, and with the climate, and that preserving and protecting the ecology and the landscape is what gives you the ability to have food now and in the future. In an urban area, your food comes through a longer supply chain, and I think we're increasingly realizing that we need to, if not shorten that supply chain, be aware of the steps within it and how we're justly and fairly compensating everyone along the way. I think within segments of society, you'll find people in every country who are thinking about those sets of issues. I think another challenge of an industrial food system is that often it separates a farm from the landscape that it's contained within. So we think that it's a freestanding unit. If you apply chemicals in one place, it will increase production, but we don't think about what it will do to the entirety of the landscape. If you look at something like the dead spot, the different dead zones that we're seeing chemical buildup, either say in the freshwater systems like the Great Lakes or in the Gulf of Mexico, we're seeing runoff that comes through our waterways that's all coming from upstream agriculture. It may not be a problem of one specific spot or another, it's a problem of a system that's thinking of itself in isolation. We can come up with, I'm sure, dozens of different examples of this, but as we think of a global crunch around water or around land, it's increasingly important that we understand that a farm is nested within a landscape and within ecological processes, as well as social processes that have to be thinking together and working in coordination to have a food system that works and that is just and fair.
This notion that America has to feed the world, from a Papua New Guinea, so from the Papua New Guinea perspective, we have everything in the food security realm. We live sustainably. How we can have assistance, or how people overseas in America can help Papua New Guineans, can help people in the region, is with things like skills transfer, is with capacity building and training, knowledge of how to enter into a global market with our agricultural development, with our foods, and to empower Papua New Guineans. We do not need things like seeds, we do not need monies or anything of that nature which could corrupt our way of life. No, but what we want to do is broaden the boundaries of Papua New Guinea and for other people overseas to come in and to work in partnership and to help us build our capacity as communities and to work on a global scale, on a global level, and open the minds of our people so that we can infuse our way of life with other walks of ways of doing things, economies, and that we can build the bridge to elevate and raise the level of Papua New Guinea on a worldwide scale, to export our cocoa, our coffee. We have diverse infrastructure of small-scale fisheries, we have forestry, we have natural resources development, we have ecotourism. These are the kind of economies in Papua New Guinea that can help the small person, that can help communities and families get above the impoverished nature of the monetary wealth. We have physical land, we have the food security, we are apt in all those areas. That is not the problem, but the difficulty we have is elevating ourselves and engaging with international level with people from around the world to help and work in partnership with Papua New Guinea to say, hey, we have our way of life, we have our way of doing things, but on a global level we'd like to transform ourselves and have the knowledgeable context to be able to trade and to work with others overseas in America and elsewhere to really elevate and remove that level of poverty and monetary wealth. So with that, I encourage and I send out a message to all Americans to lobby your government, to get online, to seek help in developing nations such as Papua New Guinea, and we would like to work with you to make our place a better world for Papua New Guineans and for the international global humanitarian work in Papua New Guinea. Introduced monoculture and large industrial scale systems that have come from Western cultures and Western trains of thought, Western doctrines, are not helping Papua New Guineans. They're not assisting us in those ways, and it's deteriorating our way of life. Large agricultural systems, environmental and social degrading practices which do not work in communal indigenous food systems that are available in Papua New Guinea. So my call out is to America, please, we do not need those kinds of things converted and imported into our country. What we do need is to get to know you as America, and to get to know you as America, to have what your investment dollar and what your humanitarian aid would go the furthest, is we need the skills transfer, we need training, we need the knowledge base to do something that's sustainable, that is eco-friendly, that is going to benefit and help Papua New Guineans on a long-term basis, so that they can be a part of the global community and not have a short-term massively produced or mass production of industrialized systems which are going to hurt our people and that are not going to help in any way for the long term. So I send out a call and a message. It's for America, for you to come to Papua New Guinea. We would like to welcome you with open arms, but to see for your own eyes what is happening in our country, and to see that these multinational companies using these seed varieties and these industrial agricultural systems, how they are really damaging our way of life, our environment, our people, our communities. But we would like to work in partnership with you to look at the sustainable, eco-friendly, organic ways that work in harness with the natural equilibrium of nature and of people and of culture. And in doing that, you're boosting up the human resource development, the people as themselves. You're giving them the tools in the way in which for them to survive and to move and transition into the modern day cash economy society where they can have money in their pockets to be able to pay for things in the family, and that they can live subsistently off the land, in their food gardens, in their rivers, in their oceans, but they can be able to develop their capital wealth and their monetary wealth to share amongst their own people, and that we really need that assistance in those areas. And we don't need these industrialized agricultural systems, we don't need these introduced foreign seeds, we don't need these scaling up and homogenized monoculture and massively produced products that is working against the way of life that we have. So I would also like to encourage you and put embargoes on highly processed foods that are being sent to Papua New Guinea in forms of tin fish, tin meat, and other things which are highly processed, like soft drinks and sugary canned drinks, which Pepsi and Coca-Cola, which are really deteriorating diets and healthy patterns that we've existed on for many generations. We do not need that. So America, come over to Papua New Guinea and be with us and see our way of life, and you can make an impact, you can make a positive effect on our people if you come with the right way and the right means of assisting us. Thank you.
With grains, modified grains coming into South Africa, it's also had a pronounced effect on farming and farmers. So unfortunately, most farmers, they go to the seed company, and what the seed company tells them to do is what they do. So they get told, buy this grain, use this chemical input, and you'll get this result. Some of the farmers that I've spoken to, that I have relationships with, they fell for that. And they brought in these modified corns, put them onto the land. And what they found is that the lifespan of these crops was 3, maybe 4 years. And the soils were in a much worse condition at the end of the period. They had a much lower yield. And in fact, this is not working for them. So what we're finding is an impoverishment because of the wrong grains coming in that are being fostered and pushed onto our farmers by effectively large business.
And I'm a friend of America, but I can say the world do not need America to feed the world. So the Americans think they can feed the world only with GMOs. And I'm convinced that is really not true. Yeah. There are a lot of scientific results that we can produce enough food for the world without GMOs. The only thing what GMOs bring us is a lot of pesticides in the world, a lot of pesticides in the water, and a lot of pesticides in the body of the human beings. Yeah? And we know the results. We see it in South America, and we see it all over the world, where free researcher can look what happened when you use GMOs connected with the terrible pesticides. And on the other hand, on a small scale of farmers, they do the same job without GMOs, and they have very less diseases. And it's possible. We can produce the food for the beef we produce or we need in Germany local. We don't need this GMO food from South America. And the farmer, they work with their own food. Yeah? They have very, very less diseases in their barns than the farmer they work with GMOs food. In the 30 years I work as a private practitioner, we see a lot of more diseases in our cows, in our pigs. Yeah? We have a lot of more works, less farmers, but a lot of more works. Yeah? And I think one major reason is that they feed all these animals with a lot of GMOs from South America, and so the GMO products connected maybe with the rests of the pesticides in this food, yeah, make the lot of diseases we see now in our barns. Okay, I have the experience that a small scale of farmers, they produce the food for their animals without GMOs. They have very less diseases in their barns. Yeah? And so it's really not necessary to use GMO food for the animals, also for the human beings, of course.
As an agronomist who has traveled to Africa, different countries in Africa, seeing different communities, meeting different farmers, seeing different agroecological zones in different countries in Africa, I have come to believe and understand that Africa can feed its people. Africans have the resources, Africans have the local seeds and the knowledge, the manpower to produce food for Africa. So I hear there are companies, a few agribusiness companies, which say they want to feed Africa, they want to feed the world. But for me, the power to feed Africa lies in the hands of we Africans. We are the ones who are managing our resources, and it's an attack on our rights to feel like someone should come from outside to feed Africa. We have initiatives, we have seeds, we have the ecology, we have the resources and the people willing to work for Africa and from Africa and to feed Africa. And on the side of the trade between countries, I see a lot of dumping of European products, American products, food products from industrial farms in the West, in the global North, coming to many countries in Africa. You look around in Uganda, in big supermarkets, you find cheap candy beef from United States, from Europe. You see candy beans. Many times these products are donated and sent to Africa, but they are not making up the African food system. They're actually killing our food system. They are killing our biodiversity. The donation of exotic animal breeds to Africa, the expense of the survival of the indigenous breeds, it's not in any way building Africa. It's actually killing Africa. It's killing our and eliminating our animal biodiversity. It's eliminating our good breeds which we have.
Can you talk a little bit about...
In Africa, the monocultural crops being promoted by a few agribusiness companies create what we call the hungry season in many farming communities. This season is a period when the monocultural crops have not matured to be harvested. Many communities go hungry during this period because they have been forced and they have been made to depend on a single crop, and all the land has been resorted to a single crop in the whole community. This is not an African way of living. In Africa, we used to have what we call the lean seasons. This is a period when if one crop has not matured, you lean on another crop which is mature in that period. And this is a very good characteristic of diversified farming, on having diversified crops, on having a diversified farm and having a bigger diversity of crops on your farm. And this is the typical African farming way. And this is how Africa has fed its population for so many years, until recently, when there is a lot of problems created by this influx of monocultural seeds and patented seeds, pesticides, chemicals everywhere, which are not making up Africa but breaking up Africa, destroying Africa. So we are counteracting this situation with supporting the communities. We as Africans, it's our responsibility to support, build solidarity, build leadership in Africa, having young, able leaders and food activists who understand the dynamics of the food system, the dynamics of the current food system which we want to change. And we are doing this through the Slow Food 10,000 Gardens in Africa, whereby every community, every school, every family comes up with their own initiative to start a garden, to teach the young people, to make a meeting place, to create a place where different families meet to discuss the future of food, and also to have a collection of the local crops which are representative of the local area, of the local economy, of the local environment. And also this garden represents the knowledge and the understanding of the local people in that local area. So we have worked in different countries with my other fellow African leaders, my other young food activists, to support the communities, to create these gardens, to support with exchange visits, to share ideas, to share knowledge, to share views, and also to discuss the future of our food in Africa. The African way of farming, to many people in the developed world, is seen as a primitive or a backward way of farming. But this is the farming for the future. The small gardens we are creating in Africa, in the 10,000 gardens in Africa, they are small actions for the future of Africa. They are small actions which we do to represent that we can feed Africa. We Africans can feed Africa, and Africa can feed the whole world. And it's Africans to work very hard in these small gardens with the small actions we do, with the seemingly primitive way of farming to feed the world. So these small actions in small gardens, in small communities, are the future of food in Africa. The imported foods, the foods from the developed world being imported into the developing world, the developing countries, is also not very good for our economy. It's not very good for our food system, because these are highly subsidized. Actually, they are double subsidized in many cases. You find that these seeds are, foods are subsidized in the countries of origin, because the farmers put them off the market in the countries of origin to keep the price high, and they are subsidized to send them to Africa. So when they enjoy these subsidies in the countries of origin, they also enjoy subsidies in the countries of destination, because most of the people importing or sending these foods, they send it as aid. They send it as they come as investors in the food system to improve the nutrition, the access to food for Africans, and in the end they get subsidies. So in the end you find that these foods are extremely cheap, and they are put in there is a lot of persuasive advertisement, and in that it's to the disadvantage of a small scale producer who is paying taxes to the government, who is working on the land 24/7, 360 days a year. And in the end, this small scale producer cannot find market for their products. And again, this small scale producer cannot favorably compete in the market with the highly subsidized industrial product. So this frustrates the producers, and it makes them lose a lot of hope, a lot of energy. It makes them feel like farming is not the right activity for them. In the end, they lose a lot of money, and their earnings are always at the bottom. And this is created by this kind of dumping. And when we have many farmers dropping out of production, it means we are losing a lot of biodiversity there, because these people are the custodians of local biodiversity. They are the custodians of local seeds, and they are the people who have kept Africans have food on the plate all the time. It's not this dumped industrial food. So we don't want to lose our small scale farmers at the expense of the imported, dumped, canned beef, canned chicken, canned fish, canned beans. We have enough of these. We have a lot out there. Good beef, good chicken. We have good fish from our freshwater lakes and from our marine sites. And we don't want to get this kind of competition from the cheap dumped food. One important thing people in the developed world don't understand is that every time our African governments sell out or offer land to the developed countries to produce food for their people, even if it's through big companies from developed world, is that this land is taken away from Africans, and they cannot produce food for their communities anymore. So this is another big problem happening out there in Africa, and many hectares of land are lost from farming communities, to big corporations, to foreign governments, to produce food for their people, to produce food for commercial purposes. And you find that these people, local people around these communities, no longer have access to land, because this land is turned into no-go zones to the local people, because it's used to produce food for someone somewhere. So we are having this problem because the communities completely lose access to the land, and it means they can no longer exercise their right to produce food for themselves. We have seen an influx of industrial seeds, patented seeds, hybrid seeds flowing into Africa, coming to different countries in Africa, promoted by a few seed companies. And these pretend like they are going to help Africa. But these seeds, this industrial way of production is not helping Africa, it's destroying Africa. It's breaking Africa, it's not making up Africa, because these seeds are making farmers slaves to the seed companies. They're making our farmers dependent on a few varieties of seeds, and also making farmers forget about our traditional seeds. Then these seeds are accompanied by a long list of agrochemicals, a long list of fertilizer recommendations, synthetic fertilizer recommendations, whereby you need a lot of water to grow these crops, and many of them camouflage like they are drought tolerant. This is not true. The real drought tolerant seeds, the real seeds and crops that can fit the harsh tropical African environment are the local seeds. These local seeds we have in the communities there. They don't need a lot of water. They can survive the pest attacks, the disease attacks, because they have gone through natural selection. They are a rich heritage of life out there in the communities. So it's our local seeds that have stood the test of time, that can survive in the harsh African environment. So it's not these hybrid seeds which need a lot of fertilizers, a lot of water, a lot of pesticides. And most importantly is that these synthetic and patented seeds, they want to be grown in a monoculture, which is a non-African way of farming, which is not suited to the African farming systems. The best African farming systems are those which do not create a hungry season. They are those which we use to create a lean season, which is known in Africa for so many years.
I didn't understand that word. Create what?
Hungry seasons. The introduction of exotic animal breeds to Africa is in one way or the other very dangerous or harmful to the biodiversity we have. One, these animals, they cross with the indigenous breeds because they cannot survive in the harsh African environment. They are temperate animals. So for farmers to find a way, and these organizations to find a way to make these animals adaptive to the local environment, they cross them with the indigenous breeds. So in one way we are losing the local pure genetic resources in these animals, in our animal breeds. Another way is that there is a lot of persuasive advertisement, how these exotic breeds are going to save African families from poverty, improve their nutrition, and the farmers are like persuaded to take them on, in that they require a lot of attention. They don't need to be mixed with the local breeds, because the farmers are taught, the herdsmen are taught that the local breeds carry a lot of diseases and ticks which will infect the exotic breeds. So the farmers shift their attention to the exotic breed, giving little care to the indigenous breeds. I've seen this happening in the cattle corridor, where the exotics are given access to water and the indigenous are made to travel all over the place to look for water. Another problem is that these exotic breeds come with a long list of recommended chemicals to use on them. They come with a long list of recommended feeds, imported feeds, and feed supplements. So this is very detrimental because you need a lot of antibiotics to treat these animals. Every family has to spend a lot of money to buy these chemicals from, again, the recommended list of retailers of these chemicals, which are made mainly in developed world. So it's a very big burden to the families, it's a very big burden to the communities, and this is one of the ways how they are really killing our farming systems. And they require different ways of keeping, they require different ways of herding. Some of them are zero grazed, others are paddocked and fenced in one place because the farmers don't want them to go to the neighborhood, they will contract diseases. It's all about, it creates a lot of tension in the community. It doesn't allow this animal to go freely, mingle with other animals, because everyone is on tension. My friend, it will contact diseases, it will come back with pathogens. So this is very terrible.
Now talk about the food.
The traditional ways of farming, the traditional knowledge out there in Africa, the traditional methods and systems of work are the farming methods for the future. And this is what we do it for the future.